We're on. Once again, thanks for coming to Sydney SPUG. I'm your Trans-Pacific teleprompter today here with the slide deck from Seattle. InfoPath is an often kind of an interesting technology because people they wonder what the heck Microsoft is doing with it. And you know, I'm here to say that InfoPath is still in the spotlight today, even though Microsoft doesn't do a very aggressive job of marketing it. It is in 2013, Office 365. It's a great client for your business processes. It allows you to create these apps without having to write code. And because it's XML based, you get wonderful support for web services, connecting to REST web services, which we now have support for in other SharePoint applications in 2013. It also is a great client for creating simple web pages. So you know, if you've got a very simple process that you want to automate, InfoPath is your one of your options. I'll talk about a couple other options in a second, but the key thing with InfoPath is that for people who are not developers, people who don't have an IT budget, they can do it themselves. So it's an empowering technology. The InfoPath adoption has been increasing. You know, we've been doing this for like 9 years now, and our website, infopathddev.com, our community site, has increased the unique viewer count every month for the last 9 years. We're now in the 60 to 70K users per month, and also though, Office 365 comes out of the box with InfoPath Sandbox and InfoPath Forms. Now the Sandbox I'll talk about more in a second because it is deprecated in 2013, which means that, well, I'll talk about what that means. It doesn't mean anything right now because it's still there. But what that means is that you can actually create forms even if you don't need the Sandbox to create forms. You can create forms in Office 365, simple forms to collect data. And one thing that's kind of interesting is Microsoft themselves were surprised that their #1 search for topic on Channel 9, which is their training site, was InfoPath. And they came to us. We're kind of the InfoPath gurus, so to speak, here in Seattle. We've got a bunch of MVPs. And they came to us and asked us to do some videos a year ago or so because of that. And they were surprised that InfoPath was so highly sought after in terms of training content. So in addition to that, Microsoft knows that InfoPath is a really important part of SharePoint, and I would guess that 20 to 25% of all SharePoint purchases hinge around that electronic form business process automation. And that's huge, right? And InfoPath is what makes that possible. So once again, value proposition for InfoPath, and I know this is old hat for many of you, but it's got that native XML support. There is no other application on the web today that supports XML like InfoPath. And that's, obviously you can write code to do it, but you don't have to with InfoPath. That's the whole point. So it really does pave that last proverbial mile to your information data collection doorstep there. And here's the picture here in the Himalayas of the monk who has InfoPath installed, and he's connected to his online business data. Okay, so why InfoPath? Well, I just mentioned it, but if you weren't paying attention, InfoPath has the XML support, which means you can do data-driven design. Key core element of this presentation. Data-driven design means flexible solutions. I'll talk more about those in a second. But it reduces effort because you don't have to create as many templates, you don't have to write as much custom code, and you can change them on the fly, so you don't have to worry about downtime. In addition, data-driven design is flexible. So things happen, to your process. You change things you need to collect. You can make those changes without causing problems. So InfoPath is great for forms, obviously, right? Structured layout validation. You can store business data and pre-populate your forms. You can do simple list forms with flat data. You can do full-blown InfoPath forms, boilerplate forms like legal documents, checklists, surveys, all kinds of things. And you can pull the data in from web services and show the data. There's a lot of options here. We've got repeating data in InfoPath, which means you can create rich constraints in your InfoPath XML, and those constraints can be mapped to databases, and you can collect data offline. In addition, InfoPath has web page support. Basically, it's a great tool for creating simple web pages. People don't often realize this, but you can do a quick lookup in InfoPath. We've got customers who look up vehicle identification numbers. They type in that VIN number that appears underneath your dashboard in your car, underneath your windshield there, and they search for a car, they search for a state based on a zip code in the U.S., and they can do lots of things. Dynamic calculations, you can do list mashups, lots of examples of this, and InfoPath here is really not so much a data collection option, but it's more about just displaying data from different places. It's more about mashing it up, getting it on the page, doing lookups, filtered lookups, and so forth. And then finally, we like to use InfoPath to do process automation. Obviously, it's not just about one single form. It's not just about displaying data, but you can also map that data to a line of business process. You can create rich dashboards and report on that data. So those are kind of the key areas for InfoPath. Now, what about when not to use InfoPath? Well, a lot of you may have run into hurdles with InfoPath, and they typically involve really large tables. If you've got a form where you need to turn on field level change tracking, don't use InfoPath, use Word. Word has wonderful revision tracking. Doesn't have the XML support that InfoPath has, but it does have the revision tracking. In addition, if you need that pixel perfect printing option, well, InfoPath doesn't do pagination very well, so you're going to have to use something like Word for that. You can print through Word from InfoPath. And then if you're using web pages and you don't have SharePoint, well, obviously you're not going to have the InfoPath Form web service, so you're not going to be able to do browser-based forms, so you're not going to be able to use InfoPath. And then finally, if you've got a really complex database with lots of constraints and it's got years and years of data, you're probably not going to want to use InfoPath to edit that data. You're probably going to want to use Access. So these are some examples of when not to use InfoPath. 2013, it's out there. It was released a couple weeks ago. We've been looking at it for 6 months or so. People keep asking me, wow, what's with InfoPath? Is it going away? So, of course, we talk to Microsoft pretty much every week. And we keep complaining that they're not doing the right messaging. And then they come back to us and they say, Patrick, that's what you guys are for. You guys are going to help us evangelize. So that's what I'm saying here today is that, no, InfoPath is hugely successful in the SharePoint space today. It's not talked about a lot because it's not one of these core Office applications. But if you think about the amount of adoption, enterprises in the U.S., millions and millions of users use InfoPath every day today. And so it's not going away. It can't. There's nothing to replace it. Now, it would be great if they made some changes to it. They did make a few changes. For those of you who have 2013 installed, they did add the managed metadata service back, so you can actually tie your InfoPath forms to managed metadata. There's some extra controls, some easier to click buttons, and ink controls for Surface. And, of course, SharePoint got REST APIs, which means that InfoPath is one of your ways you can display all that data now coming from all those REST APIs in SharePoint. Now the one negative with this, which isn't really a negative, is because now SharePoint is running with this new model, finally SharePoint got what InfoPath had since 2003. SharePoint got the separation between the presentation layer and the data layer, right? Well, InfoPath had that in 2003. And so now finally SharePoint's up to where InfoPath was in terms of its architecture, data architecture. But in order to do that, what they had to do is they had to remove this. They're basically trying to phase out the sandbox because they're worried about performance. Office 365 is scaled out on servers, and if each form has a little bit of code in it, that means Microsoft has to have more CPUs, which means Microsoft has to have more money. So they're not as profitable if everyone's running in the sandbox. And it's also just not a great model to be in. So they're deprecating the sandbox, which means it's still there. Sandbox is needed if you've got a form that has code in it, and there are probably anywhere from 5 to 25% of the forms out there will have extensions. I'll talk more about a common library we provide for extensions in a few slides. But yeah, so the sandbox is deprecated. What does that mean? It means everything works the same way as it did in 2010. In other words, the sandbox is there. But it means that in 2016 or 2017, they may decide to scrunch the resources down a little bit for the cloud-based Office 365. Now, for the SharePoint 2013 and 2016 and beyond, you'll still have the options of setting those resources yourself. So if you need to have sandbox support, it'll be there. So any questions before I jump into the key core element of this presentation, which is the data-driven design, which is the #1 best practice? Ivan, do you have any questions out in the audience? Just going to wait for your chat here. I'm still recording, of course, and look, we have demos for you. Okay, so data-driven design. What is it? Well, we'll talk about that. Why do you need to know? What are the techniques? I've got some demos. So #1, people who use InfoPath often fall into the trap of not designing their data source. And that's the #1 pitfall. They don't choose a good data source. A data-driven business process is one which can handle values as things change. Got to make sure I can keep talking here. Okay, so back to the slide. So basically what we're talking about here is we're talking about 4 techniques we're going to show. And I'll show you the data-driven design with the data source. I'll show you the data-driven design with the view. That's the labels. I'll do it with code, and I'll show you how it works with web services. 1 second. Okay. We'll hope the voice can hold. So why do you care about data-driven design? Well, when you've got a form that has normalized data in it, or a business process for that matter, it doesn't have to be InfoPath, right? Data-driven design spans the whole spectrum of development, right? If you've got a data-driven process, it means that you can configure it on the fly. You can change the data as your business changes without having to redeploy the solution. The solution is flexible. It's built to be flexible. It's built to have the data change. It's got a normalized schema. So that means that you can quickly, not only will it flex to changes in your business, but it will handle more variations. In addition, because you've got a lot of variations, you'll be able to report on those with one report as opposed to many. So we'll talk about the data source first, and I've got a scenario I want to talk about that I think will help explain this concept even further. And it involves questions. So you've got a survey form. Everyone has surveys these days, right? Well, how many survey forms do you have? Do you have one survey form, or do you have hundreds of them, depending on your surveys? The question really is, do you create one survey template for all your surveys, or do you have separate InfoPath templates for each survey? So when the questions change, do you have to create a new template? Hopefully you don't. You have one form template for everything. And this is really the first technique that I want to show you. And this is, think about a classroom. Think about a school that has a bunch of students. Every Friday, the teacher will give those students a quiz, like a survey, right? It's a quiz to say, hey, here's the questions for this last week. Did you do your homework? Did you learn the concepts? So she hands out a quiz to the students. The students fill it out. Of course, they're using InfoPath. They're using Office 2013. So she's got this online web page now that has the survey questions. And every week, the survey questions change. So if there's 20 teachers in the high school, and there's 30 weeks in the year, you could potentially have 600 different surveys. And so rather than have 600 different XSNs, we want to do it with just one. And this is the crux of data-driven design, is that we can actually create one template that will handle all the variations of the surveys. And I'm going to show that next. I'm going to do the demo in a second. I've got 2 more slides before the demo, actually 3. So data-driven design is also about pulling data into your form. So rather than hard-coding the data in the data source, you're going to be pulling data into the form. Now let's take a quick look at an InfoPath form. So this form here is a survey. And this is what you don't want to do. On the right, you can see that we've got the data source. the data source has hard-coded a number of questions. We've got question 1, question 2, and question 3. And the problem with this survey is that when the questions change, we have to create a new InfoPath form template. So rather than do this, what we want to do is we want to normalize our data schema, our data source. We want it to look something like this. So we've got here our survey form, and instead of having a hard-coded number of questions, we have a normalized number. So we can have any number of questions or surveys for this form. This form pulls the surveys in on load, pulls the questions in for the surveys. They can fill out the survey, right? So this is the best practice, is to have a schema that is flexible. And when I say schema, I mean this data source task pane on the right. This is the data behind the form. Every single InfoPath form has the data source, which is the XML structure of the data. It has the view. Of course, it has rich logic and rules and validation and data connections and everything else. But what I'm really talking about in this first technique is this data source that we see here on the right. So the data source, when it's normalized, allows us to populate the data in the form, to be flexible, and it's just a wonderful thing. So there's ways to pre-populate the data. And the first way I'm going to show is the simplest way, which is using default data. So when you have an InfoPath form, what you can do is you can go to Data, Default Values, and you can actually add your default data right in here. So this form actually, I believe, has some default data. Let's take a look. So we'll just preview the form. We've got our three questions. We've got On the Beach movie review, one of my favorite movies from Melbourne, and it's got a bunch of different questions. I've also got another question for McDonald's Cafe restaurant review. Those are different questions. So what I've done here to create this data-driven survey form is I've just added that data to the default values. Now this is the first step. This is not where you're going to end up, right? It's like you're thinking to yourself, gosh, Patrick, how am I going to add all the data to that silly dialogue? You're not. But this is the first step. This forces you to think about the data separate from the actual data source. So the data here is the values, the survey number, the survey name, the questions, and so forth. So this dialogue actually allows us to add the text right here. Now when you're in the default values dialog, don't click OK every time you add text. Just move your cursor. This is kind of confusing, but if you click OK, the dialog goes away. If you just highlight the field, you can edit it. And so obviously we're going to be editing the question text so that we can add another question, and we will add our fourth question here. Which actor was most believable? We'll add another one, which is which version of the movie did you like the best? There were two versions made, one back in the 1960s and another one more recently. So we'll preview it. You'll see that if I select that first option, I've got that new question now, and I can answer it, whatever. I like the old version. So so that's how you add default data. Now, I'm going to dig into this further, but the first point is that you're going to use that default data to force your good data source design, right? And that's going to create a data source that is not hard-coded with values, but rather it's going to be, like we saw in the data source for the survey, the simple survey form, we've got a normalized data source with repeating groups, surveys, questions. So it's flexible. It can pull those surveys in. Now the first step is to set up that default data so that you can actually then test your form to make sure that it's working. The second step, of course, is to move the data outside of the form. So how do we do that? I'm going to show you that next. But first, a few slides here. So once again, don't hard code your data source. What you want to do is you want to use default data to force a good data source design. And so what we're going to do next is I'm going to show you how to take this data and move it outside the form. So here's our form with our data in it, right? And I can preview it. And what I can do is I can save this form to my local machine. Now, I don't have save enabled, so once again, I'm just going to go into my InfoPath Form Designer, choose the options, form options, and enable save. And now when I preview it, I've got the Save button. So I'm going to save the form out. Now what's this going to do? This is going to save the XML for the preview out to my local machine. Let's take a look at that. Okay, I got another window open here. And I'm going to right-click on that file that I just saved called Survey Data XML. I'm going to open it up in Notepad. Yes, Notepad still exists. Notepad has not gone away. In spite of Microsoft's wonderful marketing, Notepad is still there, still being used today. Even for a diehard OneNote fan like me, I still go to OneNote. And you'll still be going to InfoPath in 20 years, believe me. Just kidding. Yes, you will. Okay, so here's the data we saved, including that last question. Where's that last question? It didn't save my last question. Why is that? Did I open the wrong one? But anyway, here's the question data. So let's take a look here. So why didn't it save that last one? Make sure it's still there. It is there. So if we save this out. Oh, I saved it as a different name. I'm looking at the wrong file. Well, you know it's a live demo when he screws up the demo. And I'm going to open up the real question here, the real XML that I saved in Notepad. And you'll see that there is the actual question I added. Okay, so this is the XML data, right? InfoPath is an XML editor, which for most of you don't care, right? Because you just want to create forms. But the real power of InfoPath is the ability to send this XML data to other line of business processes, like your web services or like your database. And this XML, though, can be used to create new forms. So what we did was we actually opened our survey, we previewed it, and we saved out the data into an XML file. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my designer, and I'm going to actually design a form from that data. And this is the key step. So if I click Design a Form, it's going to ask me to specify the location of the XML. So I'll go out to get my survey questions XML, and we'll just answer the questions here. There we go. So we've just loaded the XML in, and that gave us that actually InfoPath is smart. It infers a schema, a data source from the structure of that XML data. Okay, so you've got this structure here. What are we going to do? We're just going to drag and drop it over. Boom. Now what are we going to do? Preview. So now we can add our questions. So we've got a question editor. Let's add another question. What on earth? Let's see. Let's just change one of these questions here. I'm going to remove this one and just change this first one here. What was the best of the movie? Okay, so this is our silly survey question with these questions here. And I'm just going to change the first one, and we'll just make this capital so we can see it quickly. Okay, so we've saved it out. Now we've got our survey editor, so we're just going to save out the XML. What are we going to do? We're going to save it out as that XML data that we just created. We'll call it Survey Questions 2. Okay, and now the next step, the critical step, this is where it gets really interesting, is I'm going to take that XML file and I'm going to include it in my InfoPath form template. And I'm just going to, obviously you can connect, you can move the data to SharePoint, you can move the data to SQL, and you can pull it into your form. But for the purpose of this quick demo, I'm just going to include it in the form as an XML data. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook up the form to read the questions from that external data. How do I do that? Well, right now everything's in the default data. So what I have to do is I have to go in and I have to rebind these controls to point to that secondary data source. So where we have drop-down properties here, what we're going to do is we're going to set them equal to the surveys that we have here in the secondary data source. And you can see here that it automatically defaults the ID to be the survey number and the survey name. Okay, so now we've got that data. Now, if I want to go into my form here as previewing, I want to change the survey name to say like on the beach, a capitalized beach, and just save this out again. What I can do is I can reload that data in my survey form, and I just go back to data connections, just click on modify, and we'll just make sure that that's coming through. And we'll preview, and you can see here that that first question there, oops, what did I do wrong? Okay, we're getting the data from the secondary data source, and this is the correct node. And we did save it out. Did I add the right file? So we previewed it. And I had it previously open somewhere. Let me try to preview again. So let's just save it again here. So maybe I forgot to save it. File save as, and surveys 2. Okay, I didn't get that before, so obviously that was an issue. And now I've got my form. Back to my survey form. Here's my survey form. So I'm going to just go to the data connection, reload that XML data connection, just to show that it is actually pulling the survey names now from that secondary data source, and it's still not showing the right thing here. So did I say that correctly? I'm just going to skip over this. I got a lot of stuff to show you today, but we need to change the questions now as well. We need to change the questions to map them to that secondary data source. So I can go through and show you how to do this. And basically what it involves is changing the data source here to pull from the secondary data connections. But I've got a sample I've already created, so I'm just going to open up that instead and show you what it looks like. Okay, so this form here, this form has the default values, but the default data has been replaced with actual rules. Actually, we call default values, but they're dynamic. So if we click on these values in the data source over here, the survey number, you can see it's automatically calculating it based on the previous one. So we can handle any number of surveys. The survey name, of course, is referencing the survey name in the secondary data source. Okay, so it's pulling all those surveys in from that secondary XML file, and the questions are the same way. The questions actually pull all those questions in, and you can set these up. You can just basically go to your default values tab in the data source. You can click on the question text, filter the data, and you can add these filters. You can see here I've got 2 conditions. I need to pull in the question where the question number is correct and the survey number is correct. And so when we preview this, you'll see that we have different data here, and the data comes in. Now let's go and change the data. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and change that data, and we're going to go to the data connection and modify the config to point to survey questions. We'll keep the name the same. We shouldn't have to rebind it. Let's see if that works. And now we've got the On the Beach review with the capital text there. So this is an example of how you can make your form data-driven. What we did in this case was we used the XML data to quickly change the question set, right, by just loading another one. We have a question editor form, and we have the form that actually shows the questions. This is the survey filler form. But you can take this a next step. You can actually move this to SharePoint, and then you can move it to your database. So this is the crux of the data-driven design for the data source, is you've got 2 forms. You've got a form that you're using to create your config file, your questions in this case, maybe it's something else, and you've got a form that's going to be displaying them. This form pulls the data from the other one. What does that mean? It means it's flexible. If the data changes, not a problem. You don't have to republish your form. Let's take a look at another example. So it's not just the data source, but we also have the ability to make the view data-driven. Here I've got a form which is actually an expense report form. You wouldn't know it by looking at it. But here this form actually comes in. It's got a drop-down with different languages on it. So what we've done here is the same thing. But instead of using the data source, of course, is data-driven, but we've made the view data-driven. So the view actually has different calculated values for every single item on the view. Now, you'd want to probably put some guidance text in here so your designers knew what the heck they were editing. But if you right-click on these, we're using calculated values in InfoPath, and these calculated values are looking up the title of the form from that secondary data source. So I can open up that secondary data source and show you what that looks like. So here's I just need to do one change here before I preview it. I forgot to do this before, which is to set this location. And you can see that I've got my languages here, and I can edit my English labels, I can edit my Japanese labels, I can add a new language. So this is an example of using an InfoPath form. In this case, we've got our expense report form, and it includes, in the secondary data connections, it includes those localized strings, and then every single label on the form is basically referencing that, and based on the language, displaying the correct label. And this it's not just about labels. We can actually do this with buttons. We can do this with, you can see here that I've got the submit button at the bottom. If I change it to Japanese, that changes. I've also got my labels for the my drop downs here. Everything can be changed. Okay, so it's totally data driven, and that's an example of data driven, making the view data driven. We've got lots of different languages we need to support, lots of different boilerplate text. Maybe it's a legal form. You want to have different paragraphs for different clauses. You can pull all that data in from a secondary data connection, display it in the view. And that makes the view data driven, which means, once again, that the form doesn't have to be republished when the view changes. Okay, this is what we showed. Then lastly, I want to talk about and show a technique for making the code data driven. So we have another example here, see if we can find it. I'm just going to close some of these screens. And where is it? Okay, so I've got a sample form here. I'll include this with the goodies that we send to you at the end of the session today. And this form actually has is just a sample form, and it's got a table. So we got a table from our secondary data source we want to copy into our main data source. Now there's two techniques we can use to do this. And what I'm going to show is that the one technique that doesn't use any code at all is basically going to use the fact that when you set a value in a table, when you set a column, when you set the column A, it automatically fires an event for every single row that's in the default data, which means that I can actually copy the data from a secondary data source by just setting the column. Let's take a look at that. So we have a rule. This is the preview, so we'll close the preview. We'll go down to our first example here. This is a button. This button actually has a rule on it, and the rule is actually going to set that column. It's going to set column A equal to space. There's a space character right there. So we're going to set the column A equal to a space, and what's going to happen is there's going to be an event that fires, and that event is going to trigger this rule, which is going to copy the data from the secondary data source. Let's take a look. So copying and repeating data is a very popular request on our forum, and this is why I show this. But the technique here is obviously requires default data. So most forms aren't going to have the default data. And the technique does not work in that case because there's nothing to set. There's no rows to set. So we have another technique which allows us to copy using insert. And what this is this is actually going to insert the number of rows that we need, which is 3 in this case, and when they get inserted, it's going to fire the rule. So this is a little better technique because it doesn't require default data. And default data is not necessarily good because you've got blank rows that you might have to report on, and you don't want to skew the report data with those blank rows. So here what we've done is we've added a little bit of logic here in our QRules plugin that inserts the rows. So let's take a look at that. So in this rule here, what we're doing is we're inserting the rows and we're setting a command. So this plugin in the form is called QRules. We've added this plugin And what that enables us to do is to access all of the functions in this extension library using commands. So in this case, what we're doing is we're calling it, we're saying, I want to insert. There's a whole bunch of commands in QRules. One of them is called insert, and we tell it exactly where to insert and what to insert. And because we're actually passing these elements with the rule, it's data-driven. What does that mean? Well, it means that if the form changes and the data source changes, I just go in and update the rule. I go in and update the rule as action. And this is really powerful because it means you don't need to have separate code for every single form template. You can have one library that you use over and over again, which means low maintenance cost. When things change, you just update the rules. You don't have to recompile anything. You don't have to go to your developers and ask them to reinstall Visual Studio. And so typically what happens is people end up with a separate extension library for every single form template, right? Which causes a huge maintenance nightmare because, you know, like I said, maybe 25% of your forms will have extensions, will have code. And the problem with that is that you have to maintain that. So we say forget that. Go with a single approach where you have a generic XPath agnostic. You know, hey, you have a library here that is not specifically tuned to the data source of your form. And that means that when the data source changes, as you know it will, you just go in and update the rule. You don't have to recompile. So that's a huge win. And then lastly, you can even make with the web service data-driven. A lot of people have InfoPath Forms. They want to map those web service, that data into a database. So in order to do this in the browser, you have to have a web service because of the authentication hops. And so we've got a web service for every single form template. Well, once again, just like the code library, a lot of people end up hard-coding the web service to each template's data source, which causes problems when that template changes, right? You have to reconvert it, a lot of work. So don't do that. What you want to do is create one generic data web service, and this web service is going to take a mapping. So it's going to take the XML data here on the left and map it through to SQL using a mapping file. So how does that look? Well, here's the mapping. In the middle, you've got the web service. We're actually going to configure the mapping based on an admin tool that basically allows us to map from XML to SQL. So it's data-driven because the mappings can be loaded. Okay? So just to recap the data-driven design, this was the core piece of this presentation, right? The data-driven design is the most important best practice that you need to get when you're doing InfoPath. And you can do it in multiple ways. You can use the data source and create one data source that's normalized and use it for lots of different surveys or lots of different checklists or whatever you're going to do, quizzes. There are a lot of patterns like quizzes and surveys where you're going to be using a repeating section, repeating data. Whenever you have a repeating piece of data in your form, you know you can make it data-driven. That's your key. If you've got an expense report with repeating items, each item has a category, right? You can actually make that category pull from a config file. So when the categories change, your expense report doesn't have to be republished because it's just loading the data from a SharePoint list. In addition, you can make the views data-driven. That cuts down your cost because you don't have to have multiple views. When something changes, you don't have to make the same change across all the views. Make it once. You can make your extension library, your code data-driven by extracting the XPath out. Say, hey, I'm just going to use an XPath agnostic approach. So I'm going to pass the code the actual XPath, which is the data source, where I want it to work. If we want to insert a node into a table, we pass it the path to that table's node. And that's great because you get one piece of code for all your forms. You don't have to write code. You don't have to have a developer. You can just use our QRules plugin, and you can use it for all your forms. But lastly, with web services, you want to make it data-driven as well. Once again, the web service is typically going to be mapping data from your XML file into some other location, SQL database, some kind of a web line of business process. So when you do that mapping, don't tightly couple it. And one of the things that people use is BCS. Unfortunately, BCS creates a very tight coupling. What that means is when things change in your form, because they will, you'll update your form, you'll change fields, BCS has to be reconfigured, and that's a problem. So I recommend using a data-driven, loosely coupled web service to do that. So that's it for the core of this. I'm going to go over other best practices. This will take about 5 minutes and just go through the laundry list. And then I've got a bonus section here on how to do solution lifecycle development, talk about compliance. I've even got a short demo at the end where I show you how you can create a checklist for your InfoPath Forms solution process. But first, any questions from me on part 3? That was the biggest part of this presentation. I hope to get some kind of feedback from Ivan here. Yay, nay? Are people asleep? How many people are dozing away? Well, I've lost the audience. Nope, he's typing. Okay, great. Okay, so lastly then, I know everyone's like, can't wait to get the sponsor data. Okay, I'll wait. Great. Questions? I've got chamomile tea and I've got tonic water. So I'll take any question. Yes, so wonderful question, and the question I think is when you're using SharePoint Web Services, because the data connections are hard-coded in the forms, when you move from one server to another, those data connections don't get changed automatically. So we have a solution for you, and it's called the migration tool. One of the products that we have is this web service kit, DBXL Web Services, which is our data-driven web service. And I can show you this real quick here on our website. Thank you for the plug, whoever's asking the question here. But we have on our website, underneath web services, we have the DBXL services. And this is really this generic data-driven web service that maps. And so what you're doing is you're going to use one of the tools that hangs off of this. And we've got this thing called the migration tool, which will move your forms from one location to another, and they'll fix up the URLs at the same time. Now, if you're using data connections that are UDC, that's best practice, a universal data connection, which means that you've converted the data connection to live in a data connection library. That's the best practice, right? You can do it with relative or central data connections. When you do that, it's going to store the data connection in a UDCX file on that central admin server. So you have to go in and change those UDCX files when you move it from dev to production. So what you're going to want to do is have some kind of a script. It could be an InfoPath form that edits that UDCX file when you move it. And so what you're going to do is you're going to move the form over, and then you're going to fix up those links to point to the new central data connection, new central admin site, if dev and prod are different. And then what you'll do is you'll change UDCX. So it's not a super happy story out of the box, but if you've got our migration tool, it'll automatically fix up those URLs in your form to point to the correct UDCX files on the production server. You'll still have to change the UDCX files to point to the data on the production servers, but it will get fixed up. I'm not sure I was able to completely answer that, but I'm more than happy to talk about that at the end too. We get that question a lot, and there's really there's two parts to it. One is you need your data connections to be located in a data connection library. You need them to be converted to be universal data connections so that they're data driven, right? Because your data connections, if they're in the form, they're hard coded. So when you change the form's location, you have to change data connections, right? So make your data connections data driven by moving the data connection outside. And then what you're going to want to do is furthermore, because your form still relies on that data connection library, that has to get fixed up when you publish, right? So when you move to production, you've got to rechange that location where it's pulling the UDCX files from. So you'll need to have that automated. And if you've got a lot of data connection libraries, or if you've got one with a lot of data connections in it, you'll need to fix those up, and our data migration tool does fix that up. Anyway, I'm more than happy to chat with you in email later, or to show you a demo next week or this week on that. Okay, just going to wait. Other questions? Well, there will be a very short pause in the video here. Just going to wait until I get Ivan's flag. So question from Ivan here is, second question, thank you for the questions. Let's see, so regarding the earlier point about not being able to use InfoPath for change tracking, could you not use your web service technique to achieve this? Well, you can do change tracking in InfoPath. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying in general, if you have to show those revisions in the form, the InfoPath UI is not going to, it's a layout, it's an HTML, so how do you show all the different revisions in the form? You can't do it. It's hard to do. But yeah, we use our InfoPath form web service, DBXL, to track every single version. So when you submit the form, it takes a copy. Submit version 2, it gets a copy. So we can then compare version 1, version 2, version 3, and that's great for submit level change tracking. But what I was referring to earlier was field level for change tracking, which is I want to know that the form, I want to know the doctor in the emergency room signed off on this one field in the form, right, by clicking a checkbox or something. So you want to capture, who did it, what the date and time was, so that you can go back for auditing purposes and have that field level control, the field level auditing. And you can do it in InfoPath by adding a little control to your form that just remembers every single change in the form. And it just is a repeating table in the form, right, that you don't show them. Every single time they edit the form, it remembers what they did, right? So there is this thing called the error board in InfoPath, and there's also this thing called the, you can essentially journal every single change to the InfoPath form into your own little history list, right? So even within edit submits, between, within edits, within the form edits, you can actually track it in the form. And I can show you a technique to do that. The problem is, how do you actually show those changes on the form? You can show them in a task pane, or you can show them in a section if it's a browser-based form. But you have a hard time visualizing, this like in Word, you've got the little comments and the pop-ups and things like that. Even in Word, it gets really busy after about 5 edits. But InfoPath is almost impossible. So my point earlier was really more about how do you show the revision tracking in the form. If you just care about submit level revision tracking, sure, you can use the web service. If you need to do field level tracking, you can still use InfoPath. Okay, thanks for the questions. Okay, so moving right along, we're going to just quickly go over the best practices for InfoPath. We talked about the #1 best practice, and that is the data connections data source. That's the main data source, number 3. Make sure your data source is data-driven, right? But there's others. There's lots of best practices. And I've got a little compliance form I use to check whether forms are meeting the best practices. And this is forms governance, right? You have lots of forms you're developing. Most companies have hundreds of forms, right? And some of those forms will be list forms. Some of those forms will be InfoPath forms. Most of them actually that have repeating data, you'll have to have an InfoPath form template. So you're going to have hundreds of forms, right? You need some process here to allow people to, to go through and get checked off. This form is meeting compliance, right? And so because they're not, IT staff, they're just business process owners, you want to give them some kind of a metrics. So to getting started, what you want to do is give them some pieces that will make it easier. We talk often about starter forms. You'll want to create a bunch of templates in your organization that you can reuse over and over again to enforce consistency. That also helps them come up to speed because the templates can have the data connections pre-baked in them. The starter forms can have your UI, your elements of your consistent UI design and so forth. Then you want to take all those data connections that you're using in your form, maybe it's user profile service or whatever, and you want to convert them into the data connection library. And like I said earlier, with regard to that first question, this makes it easier to migrate because the data is living outside the form. So the form doesn't have the data connection hard-coded in it. It's actually in a UDCX file in the data connection library. And that's good because then when you need to change it, you just go into the UDCX file and edit it. Now, when you're moving from one server to another, you're still going to have to change the location where all those USXs live in your form. And you'll have to do that using either our tool or manually go in and do it yourself by editing the manifest file in the InfoPath template. But you definitely want to use data connection libraries. They do make it easy because people, they want to add data to their forms. They want to have a search, for example, or user profile service or something. So when you've got these data connections, you want to put them in a common location so that people can go up there, okay, I just need to copy these data connections into my form, right? So they can just browse to them using InfoPath Designer, add them to their form template, and they don't have to worry about configuring them. And then these data connections work really well with XML template parts. XML template parts are these common sections, like you might have a header, a footer with common controls in it. XML template parts are great because they speed up your time. They come with not only the view, but the data source and the data connections. So you get all of those things in your XTPs. And that's why it's the best practice. Okay, so that's getting started. So with secondary data connections, once again, these are your data connections. So you're going to convert all those to UDCs. You're going to add XML resources for anything that you need to put in the view where it's view state information. So it's not going to persist in the form. So one example would be like a guidance text. So if you have guidance text in your form, you'll want to not put that in the main data source. You want to put that in a secondary data connection. You'll want to use web services to filter your data. Don't pull everything into your form on load, right? Because it'll bog down the form. It'll make it really slow to load. You definitely want to use REST web services. There's a huge presence of REST web services in 2013. InfoPath had REST back in 2010. It was the first Office application to have REST web service support. So once again, InfoPath was kind of ahead of the curve there as well. And REST is wonderful because you can connect to web services online, pull data into your form. You can filter it in the URL. So REST is a web service that you just specify the parameters in the URL to the web service, and it works really well in InfoPath. So main data connection, we talked about making this data-driven. That's the key best practice here. And there's some others as well. I'll send you the deck. I'm just going to skip through this because I'm running out of time here. But you want to make sure you're using a secondary, a common library like QRules that does not hard code the XPaths. In addition, a lot of times people, they create workflows and they don't realize that the form is going to be showing them the status. So it's better to have the controls in the form that actually map to the data in SharePoint. So you're going to have a SharePoint workflow or an in-text workflow or something out there. You're going to want your form to interact with that. How do you do that? Well, you're going to create some kind of a section on your form with buttons to approve and reject, and those buttons will interact with your workflow by setting columns, setting promote properties. So that's the best practice as well. So you've got all these best practices. Views, you're going to want to make them consistent, use headers, footers, have guidance text, maybe a suggestion box, terms and conditions. You can have separate tabs. I can show you some examples, but these are just some best practices here. So taking all these best practices, we've actually created, there's some more best practices. There's SharePoint. So SharePoint list forms are great, up to 50 fields or so. But after that, you're going to want to convert it into an InfoPath form template. Library views, you can handle permissions up to 5,000 rows, and then you've got issues with item level permissions. So you've got some out-of-box limitations. Just make sure that when you're planning your form, if you've got a large form, has 100 fields, don't use a SharePoint list form. If you have a form that has to store 50,000 rows and it has to have item level permissions, don't do a library. Don't make your data, push your data into SQL. Don't have the data live in the library. You can use data view web parts on top of your database to show the data in SQL, and it will look just like SharePoint. They won't know where the data is, but it's just a better way of scaling. So we've got this project checklist. I want to just quickly show you this. We've developed this form, and to close my last form. So we've developed this form, which I'll send you as part of the kit. It's called the detailing form, and what this form does is it gives you 31 metrics So what you do is, this is just an InfoPath form, right? Here's an example of a show hide section with guidance text, right? That's not in the main data source. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add our form to this. I've got the expense report. So I've got the localized expense report. I'm going to call multi-language. And I just attach my InfoPath form to my InfoPath form. Isn't that crazy? Yes, it's recursive. It turtles all the way down. Okay, so we're going to attach our expense report form here. And then I'm just going to click the button. Now this form has 11 automatic metrics, so we're going through and we're actually checking all the best practices of the form. Now some of these are not automatic, so I have to actually answer them. But then you can see there is an automatic metric there. So these are all these common things that we look for. And this is an example of using InfoPath to force governance for your InfoPath form. In other words, to make sure it's following the checklist that you put in place. And you can provide your team with a guide of, we've got a nice 35-page document on best practices and how to create good forms. So basically what we do is we create this form that gives us the ability to add some text and review the form. This is a business process for reviewing InfoPath forms, even though we're using InfoPath, right? This creates a nice report that I can send to the user, and the users then get a number, 71% in compliance. Maybe your bar is at 80. So you can print this out PDF, you can send a report to the business process owner who made the form, and you can tell them, look, you need to improve your data types, or you need to improve your repeating node containers. And you can give them that feedback. So this is an example of using an InfoPath form to force governance for other InfoPath forms. Okay, any questions on that? Last but not least, InfoPath Solution Lifecycle. This is actually a bonus section. Ivan, do we have time? Okay, thanks. You're so fast at the typing there. So this is new content. Haven't presented this yet. And it's not a lot of pictures, but I want to go through what the life cycle is for InfoPath. So what you're going to do with InfoPath Solutions, you're going to create your foundation. You're going to figure out what the gaps are. You're going to review the products out there that fill the gaps. You're going to develop your forms. You'll create dashboards, and you'll then bridge those solutions, those processes with external data, external people and processes. So the first step is to establish a foundation. So this is what we recommend to people when they're starting InfoPath development. Get the best practice training. Get the slide deck from this presentation. Go over it. Understand the data-driven design thing, because that's the most important one, right? That's the common gap out there, is people don't create good data sources. You're going to want to take 10 or 20 of your representative processes internally that you want to automate. These are typically paper forms that you want to get into your SharePoint site. You're going to want to identify the common sections of those forms, because they will have common headers, they'll have common logos, they'll have common terms and conditions. The admin section at the bottom might be common. There will have obviously unique areas. All the forms are different, but there will be commonality among those forms. So you want to identify what that commonality is. And then from that, what you want to do is you want to create reusable components for those common sections. You also want to identify the common data connections. We talked about user profile service. We talked about maybe there's a database lookup that you want everyone to use. Client number, you want to look up the client information based on the client number. So you've got a database query. That query is going to be converted into a common data connection. Everyone can use that, right? You can include that then in the XML template part for the common section, so that every time they add that XTP into their form, it's going to automatically give them that data connection. Then you're going to take those common components and data connections, you're going to build these starter forms. Starter forms have consistent look and feel, color scheme, font, background images, you name it, and they've got some of those pre-baked components. Those starter forms then get handed out to your team. They can then accelerate the process of creating forms. Finally, you're going to want to have some kind of checklist for your forms governance. I showed you one example. You're going to want to create a list of metrics or checks and balances that you use to to rate the forms that you're developing. Okay, so then the next phase, after you've got the foundation, you need to figure out the gaps. You need to figure out where you're going. And you know, one of the gaps is copying multiple rows. Another gap is mapping libraries, InfoPath Form XML files to lists. Maybe you want to convert an image into a link. There are lots of gaps that require code or out-of-box. They're not out-of-box supported. So there are a bunch of gap fillers out there. We provide a number of gap fillers. We've got our QRules Common Library, single dev license. You can use it in unlimited number of forms. It's very inexpensive. We've got our web service. You can talk to Ivan about that. Ivan has had experience with our web service. It's a data-driven web service. Highly scalable, uses SQL databases, very configurable. Works great, you know, if you've got more than 5 forms that you want to map into your database, it'll save you time and money. And then finally, there's a lot of tools out there for doing things like CAPTCHA, electronic signatures. You can, like I said, migrate forms from one site to another. We've got those tools for you. So you can come out to our InfoPath Dev site. You can ask us. You can ask Ivan. He can point you to the right location. We also have starter templates, XML template parts, and other things. So then once you've figured out which gaps you're going to plug with which products, maybe you don't need any. You're out of box. And we've seen people that just do everything out of the box, and they get wonderful amount of work done. But there are some times when you might want to extend it and use those out-of-box fillers. I'm sorry, the gap fillers for the places where the out-of-box stuff has a gap. And then you're going to start developing your forms. You're going to go through and you're going to select those key business processes from those 10 to 20 forms. And you'll create these forms. You'll migrate existing data from Excel or from some database into your forms. We've got tools for those. And then you'll specify validation, business logic in the form. You'll build your workflows, notifications, permissions, and so forth. And then you'll map the data into your SharePoint list, a library, or a SQL database. The fourth stage is dashboards and reports. So in the first phase, we were building a foundation, learning about what to do, setting up the stage. In the second phase, we were figuring out what the gaps are to make sure that we have a solution when we hit the gaps, and looking at what those gap fillers are. And then in the fourth stage, we're looking at actually developing the processes, developing the forms, the solutions, and then finally we're doing dashboards and reporting. And that means that you're finally taking the data from those InfoPath forms and you're mashing it up. In SharePoint, you can do this with web parts. You can create little InfoPath forms or reports that display the data in a web page. They pull the data from other XML forms. You can create SQL reporting services if your data is mapped to SQL, and you can even do just map your data to a list and use Excel on top of that. And then the sixth step, the sixth stage in this solution lifecycle is connecting to those external processes and people. You can do offline stuff. You can configure anonymous submits. They just log into SharePoint and submit a form. You can configure external email. You need an Exchange server on that machine. If you don't have that, you can email the forms to those disconnected users and enable them to send it back to you via the submit button. They will need InfoPath Filler for that. You can sync the forms offline with SharePoint Workspace. People think this is not supported, but you can actually do it so long as the forms are saved to a document library, not a form library. SharePoint Workspace will synchronize XMLs in document libraries, but not form libraries. So we have a solution for that we can give you. Save and submit to local folders. You can have an InfoPath form kiosk, which is just a form. It's a machine that has InfoPath installed on it. They just go to the machine like their doctor's office. They fill out a form, get their prescription, right? So it's just like totally isolated, right? So there's no SharePoint connectivity or whatsoever. It's one machine writing to the file system. And then finally, you can build separate web pages that that submit the data to basically submit the XML data to a web service that submits it to your SharePoint site. So we have free samples. All you have to do is contact us. You can tweet at qdabra software. We will send you the goodies. The goodies are the slide deck, the data-driven samples that I have. I have 3 labs on how to do the data-driven sample that I presented. And then we have a giveaway. Pluralsight is here. They've got 2 vouchers for training, and I want to just hand over the mic to Ivan. Any questions on the last section? Yeah, so great question. What are the changes to mobile support in 2013? Well, like I said, the Surface stuff, specifically what they've done is they've enhanced the buttons and the ink controls so that they work better with Surface. Now you're saying, well, I've got a phone. Well, okay, so you've got a phone. The buttons will work a little bit better because the control is different in 2013. So there will be an improvement, but right now in mobile support's there, it's working well. We are working on what we call a rich client filler for the iOS as well as for the Windows Surface. You don't have InfoPath running on your phone or on your tablet. So there's a bunch of techniques out there today. There's a company called Formotus, which is we work with them, and Formotus has a nice solution out there for displaying your data. And we're also working on a similar solution. But out of the box, you have the browser support, and the browser support gets better in 2013 because they've made changes to the way buttons show up, and they've made changes to the way the ink control works with those mobile forms. When it's displayed in the Surface tablet, you will see those changes, and I believe that the buttons will work better in the browser as well, but I haven't verified that. Other questions? My cat is meowing in the background. She needs some food, baby. I looking for Ivan's text here. I do want to thank everyone.